So here it comes. As I mentioned in the last lesson, we're going to challenge ourselves and we were going to try and do some extended writing using everything we've been talking about up until this point. If you could write the title and also write down the keywords. I've put this keyword in influence in here just so there's clarity about what each word means. Influence is the way something affects something else. So I influence my students influence me, my students influence each other. Okay, that's simply what that word influence means. Also, we talked about landscapes. Now, those are the upland and lowland areas. They're the Lake District. It's the Weald that we learned about. That's what that means. Pause the video. Let's get started. Having this lesson online in a video is excellent because it means if you find it difficult, you can pause and stop and go back when you need. The first thing I'd like you to do is to write down the question here. Assess the influence of geology on the landscape of the UK. So this question is similar to the ones that we've encountered in paper 1. It says assess. That word assess means measure. When you assess something, you measure something. How big, how small, how long term, how short term, how small scale, how large scale, how social, how economic something is. That is measuring. So we're measuring the influence of geology. If you remember, geology is rock type. So we're measuring the influence of rock type on the landscape of the UK. Now, the special thing about paper 2 is that for the 8-mark questions, unlike paper 1, they give you a resource. Okay, so in paper 1, when you had an 8-mark question on Lagos or an 8-mark question on Hurricane Katrina or Japan or Haiti, you would have to use your own knowledge and understanding. So you'd have to remember and learn the number of fatalities in Hurricane Katrina, for example. Then you'd use that to construct your argument, to construct your debate. With paper 2, you can't do that because they provide you with a resource, and that is the resource that you need to plunder as much as possible to get the facts out of it. And then you need to use your own understanding to try and make sense of it. First thing we want to do is to work out what each map is showing us. So this first one here is showing us the geology, which means rock type. And it shows us metamorphic rock and igneous rock and then other rocks as well. But I'm quite confident that you might be able to tell me what these other rocks are in the rest of the country. That's right, it's sedimentary rocks, okay? So we might want to use that in our answer, okay? I apologise for my writing with the mouse there. So that's the first map, and we hopefully should see a pattern that the metamorphic rock and the igneous rock are in the north of the UK, apart from our anomaly down in the southwest that we described in question 1. Sorry, in lesson 1. The next map we've got is a map showing the landscapes. Okay, this is showing the landscapes, and it's got that word in there at the bottom, relief. That means the shape of the land. So this is our relief topographical map, and it's showing the upland areas, and it's also showing us the lowland areas. So first thing we have to ask yourself, and this is why we're going to move over to here. First thing you need to ask yourself is there a pattern or a link between these two maps? Hopefully you should be able to see that, yeah, there's a very strong pattern here where you have igneous metamorphic rocks. Here you have upland areas. So now we're starting to put together our first paragraph. What is the influence of geology on the landscape of the UK? It has a big influence, right? Because where you find metamorphic and igneous rocks, you find upland areas, you find mountains. So there's paragraph 1. But that won't be enough, year 10. That won't be enough just to talk about that. We need to introduce some other ideas. So we need to now think about whether there are any other things that influence landscape. Well, if you think back to the last 3 lessons, we've talked about loads of things that don't really have anything to do with rock type. Glaciers? We talked about glaciers. Now that's to do with climate, long-term climate change. That's not really about rock type at all. Glaciers, which created, what did they create? That's it, they created those U-shaped valleys. Well, you know what? We find U-shaped valleys here in the Lake District, which we learned about, okay? So we're now introducing other ideas. What else did we learn about? What about tectonics? If you remember the Weald, which was down here, the North and South Downs, which we learnt about 2 lessons ago. The Weald was made from clay and chalk and is a lowland area. It had been weathered away, but it had been lifted up through tectonic uplift in the first place. That was really important. Without that happening, there wouldn't have been any chalk on top of that dome. There wouldn't have been any chalk to get weathered away in the first place. That's not to do with geology. What about weathering? Freeze-thaw weathering, biological weathering? What about the climate? So if we remember that the west of the UK was wetter than the east, that's going to affect the landscapes. That's going to cause more freeze-thaw weathering on the west, where it's higher up as well. Here's the thing though, you can't talk about all of these, otherwise you're in danger of it becoming a giant big list, okay? So be careful of that. I would say, yeah, last lesson, remember we talked about impact of humans. Humans are not anything to do with geology. How have we changed the landscapes? Well, we've changed the landscapes by doing farming, by having forestry, by doing forestry, by managing the areas of forest land. Okay, so you need to think about all these things. If you need to go back to this page with these comments on it, fine, do so please. This resource with the maps is actually loaded up on Teams, so you can download it and print it and use it as you wish. Or you might want to take a screenshot from this video and then have it as a separate tab or a separate window. Okay, so this is our page with which we're hopefully going to do a really good piece of writing on this. If we remember that the AKU paragraphs are as follows, if you look at the top right, A is assessment. You start by saying to some extent, to a lesser extent, to a large extent. You don't even have to use that language. You can say on the one hand, but you have to make some kind of measurement for the first bit. So I might want to say, to some extent, geology has a big influence. An influence can be big, an influence can be small. Geology has a big influence on landscape in the UK. Then I need to get some facts from the resource. I'm going to say that slowly and clearly. Facts from the resource. If you don't do that, you can't get top marks. You can't even get more than about 4 out of 8. So you've got to get something, and a way to do that is use this kind of language. Figure 4A, 4B shows. Literally say what you see. Well, that pattern that we looked at before, write it out. Then you've got to explain it. So for example, if you said that, and this is where your understanding comes in, if you said that figure A and 4B show that areas of igneous rock have upland areas or areas of metamorphic rock create upland areas, you need to say why. So you need to talk about the rock. You need to say this is because the rock is resistant to erosion, so it tends to form upland areas in the UK, and that would be fine. Next up, we need to introduce, after we've done that, we need to introduce our second idea, a second factor to make our second paragraph. Guys, it doesn't matter if you do glaciers and U-shaped valleys or if you do tectonics. Warning though, don't do all of them and don't turn it into a list. So this is what our second paragraph is going to look like. To a lesser or greater extent, you decide. But here, you're going to put in your factor. So if you think you want to talk about tectonics, extinct volcanoes, the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, things like that, put that in there. You decide how big an influence it is. Again, repeat the process. Get some facts from the resource. Now, unfortunately, the resource is quite thin. On the ground, it only shows rock type, it only shows geology and landscapes. But you can work in your understanding of the UK. We know that the Weald is in southern England. We know that Giant's Causeway is in Northern Ireland. You can put that in there too. Then explain it. So how has this extra additional factor affected landscapes? How has tectonics affected landscapes? How has weathering affected landscapes? And finally, we're going to do our conclusion. Our conclusion, give your opinion. Overall, I believe, my opinion is geology is or isn't the biggest influence. Give your opinion and explain it, and just keep it simple. Pause now. If you need to go back, please do so. And I hope this has been useful to you, and I look forward to seeing what you get with this. To finish off, I've got a quiz that recaps our understanding and knowledge from paper 1. So pause and see if you can remember the answers. So answers are here. Please check and correct. Next lesson, we are going to be looking at factors affecting coasts and coastal landscapes. So the next 7 lessons, we're going to be looking in detail at coasts and the processes that affect them. Thanks for watching.